shortly within the year of Kennedy's assassination, or I should say shortly after, about a year after, another incident will take place that will change the direction of America's involvement in the Vietnam War. In August of 1964, U.S. ships patrolling the Gulf are going to report that they have been fired upon by the North Vietnamese. There are two separate incidents, about 2 days between the two. Intelligence tells us that an attack did take place. However, it's reported to the American people that the attacks were unprovoked, which we find out later is not to be true. The debate regarding the Gulf of Tonkin incident revolves around the second attack, and I'm doing the air quotes right here, because there are eyewitnesses, or there are reports given saying that the attack occurred. There are others that are saying that the attack did not occur. Then comes into question, well, was the attack provoked? I mean, there's just a lot of this and that, and to think that intelligence is not clear on the situation. However, there's circumstantial evidence to suggest that it did take place, and under that intelligence, we move forward. And when I say we move forward, Johnson will request elevated authority with regards to the Vietnam War, and Congress will allow it, and this will be known as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. So let's go ahead and underline that. Obviously, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is in relation to the incidents that took place in the Gulf of Tonkin, and I apologize for geography reasons or what have you. The Gulf of Tonkin obviously is a body of water in the northern part. I mean, again, if you were to cut Vietnam in half, it would be considered the northern part of that half. And yeah, so, Johnson, in essence, is going to be given an authority, or given elevated authority, to take all steps necessary to protect American forces and maintain an independent, non-communist South Vietnam. Now, I'm reading this, and I'm aware of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, and, the Truman Doctrine kind of already affords you that. But there was a different attitude with the Vietnam War as opposed to the Korean War. Again, the Korean War is in the 50s. The Korean War was shortly after a successful effort in World War II. The Korean War saw a stalemate, and it was difficult for America to swallow the notion that we didn't win, but there were lives lost to maintain the status quo, and that seems problematic, or it seems difficult. It's a difficult concept to fathom in the American psyche. So the Truman Doctrine is different, or I should say the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It seems like it gives you the same authority, but it's under a different pretense, I guess, in that society is changing at this time drastically. There's an attitude in the air that is revolutionary, not only in the United States, but around the world, that ordinary people are fed up. They're tired of colonialism, of imperialism, of sexism, of racism, of Americanism, I guess. And maybe that required, because of that attitude, there was I guess a different resolution that was required to convince people that this was going to be appropriate. Nonetheless, Johnson will use the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And again, history has shown us that there's not concrete evidence. There's still a great deal of historical debate regarding as to whether or not if the Gulf of Tonkin incident actually occurred. The way in which it was sold to the American people. But the significance of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution is that it affords President Johnson the ability to escalate the war, escalate America's involvement. It leads to an immediate increase in U.S. action in Vietnam. We'll be dropping 1 million tons of bombs between 1965 to 1967 and increasing American troops from 100,000 to almost 500,000 in 2 years' time during his presidency. At this time, I would like for you guys to underline the Tet Offensive. This is a military attack coordinated by the Viet Minh. Again, the Viet Minh are the North Vietnamese revolutionaries, and the Viet Cong, which are the South Vietnamese sympathizers with the Viet Minh. They coordinated a series of attacks on South Vietnamese cities. Tet is a holiday, and so people are to be resting and relaxing with family and friends, and now we have this conflict taking place. It's designed to catch you with your guard down. It's designed to have an element of surprise with it, and because of that, they will be successful. The Tet Offensive is televised, and the American people are disgusted. They're devastated. They can't believe what's going on all around the. I mean, clearly, on the other side of the world, what has America got themselves into? And again, television, I think, it gets a bad rap sometimes. Of course, previous generations will look at television as the idiot box. It's going to drain your brain, and it does this and it does that. And don't get me wrong, there are elements to that, and you get those arguments today when people are like, "Oh, TikTok is destroying people," and Twitter is, just a space for trolling. But we can definitely have those views for sure. And there's element of truth to a degree for sure. However, that doesn't mean that these mediums don't have influence in shaping society's perspective. And television did just that. And when we're talking about, reporters were literally in the firefight next to soldiers. And the fact that this was being transmitted into the homes of everyday Americans. This was the first war you could really watch and get updated on daily, weekly, from so-called trusted, news sources, reporters, stations, as they were to be believed back in the day. Whereas today, again, with the oversaturation of information, there's a tendency to not believe news sources that are considered traditional by way of television. But the fact that this offensive was televised, it was a gut punch to the American people's understanding of the conflict. It was a gut punch to the narrative that the Kennedy administration and the Johnson administration was selling to the American people. We're coming to the realization that things are not apparently what our government said they were. What the Americans are consuming in regards to the Vietnam War and what they are being told about the Vietnam War are from two different points of origin. The number of protests in the United States over the war will increase, and Johnson's approval rating will drop below, or to, I should say, 35%, which is pretty catastrophic. And when you look at this picture here, I mean, when have you ever seen a president look like that? If you're not aware of presidential history and whatnot, rarely do you see presidents in compromising positions during moments of, I guess, what some people would consider weakness. But I mean, my goodness, man, They're human beings. Don't get me wrong, they have to be leaders, and they're leaders of the free world. There's a lot on their shoulders. You know, even with President Roosevelt's administration being elected to 4 terms, many Americans were unaware that most of the time he was restricted to a wheelchair. Uh, and every so often he would stand, but by and large, they the administration didn't want to give off the impression that their president was not physically uh, as abled as others, and that might give off the impression that he's weak. Which, it just goes to show how far we've come in this country when we observe um, people that are, uh, you know, dealing with physical ailments, mental ailments, dealing with depression, mental health, and how we observe that to be okay. Um, it's unfortunate uh, that back then these type of images would be viewed in a negative light. When, if anything, they expose humanity, they expose a little bit of reality that everybody struggles. I remember when Barack cried on television, I believe, in regards to school shootings. I want to say it was Sandy Hook. This is unfortunate that there's so many. It's difficult to discern that moment. But I want to say uh, with Sandy Hook, Barack cried or shed a tear. And the media flamed him up for that too. Like, it's such a weird world we live in that the notion of children, innocent kids being hurt doesn't, it might move you to cry. I don't know. We look at this picture of Johnson and it doesn't look good. Um, it's definitely a moment of vulnerability. The Tet Offensive exposed the Vietnam War for what it always was. And it really established in the psyche of many Americans that this was a war we should not be in, a war we probably can't win, shouldn't win. It's not ours to win. But time will tell with that. There are many more years of fighting and dying, unfortunately, that will take place in the Vietnam War. I want to circle back on what I was discussing at the very beginning of this recording, this lecture, regarding the youth in revolt, and that more and more young people were beginning to question the foundations of their fathers and mothers of the United States. By the late 1960s, millions of young people were openly rejecting the values and behaviors of their elders. This revolution was televised and eventually sold with the notion of absolute individual liberation. And this will be wrapped up in a pretty bow labeled as the counterculture, which is interesting because, again, if you look at the title, or I should say, if you look at the verbiage that's on the slide, the notion of absolute individual liberation. If that's not American, then I don't know what is. If you've ever taken History 1301, if you look at many of our founding fathers, um, early colonial settlers, many of them, Patrick Henry, give me liberty, give me death, many of them, Shays' Rebellion, many of them, Thomas Paine, many of them, transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, many of them wanted individual liberation. The freedom to be yourself in a world that's constantly trying to make you someone else. Which is why I use that quote at the beginning of the lecture by Albert Camus. I forget how you pronounce it. Something like that. Individual liberation. I thought that's what we wanted to be. I thought that was the epitome of the American spirit, the individual. However, we're going to label society during this period. We'll label these people who want to be individuals as a problem, that they are running counter to, I guess, the new American tradition, which was conformity. But we should observe and understand that their very essence, their desire to be truly independent, may be the gift and the curse of America. That it's our desire for freedoms that ultimately may place our freedoms in jeopardy. Maybe, or maybe it's our desire for independence so much so that we forget who we are. Maybe as a nation, as a people, as a society. That maybe those definitions are primitive. That we run with this notion of individuality to such a degree we don't recognize the notion of, well, I'm a Texan or I'm an American anymore. And we simply see human beings. If you could imagine a world where we are one, not to borrow too much from John Lennon's music, but I believe that was the idea. These attitudes are emerging. People are exploring, they're considering what it means to be free, what it means to be an American. Specifically women. Women will begin to reevaluate their circumstances in the wake of this civil rights movement. At this time, I would like for you guys to underline the feminine mystique. The Feminine Mystique is a book written by Betty Friedan, which planted a devastating picture of talented, educated women wasting away in a comfortable concentration camp, where her only goal should be that of a wife, her only goal should be that of a mother, and that she, in essence, is wasting away. Desires, ambitions, to maintain and uphold a standard they had no decision in making. A standard. Like, and you ask yourself, well, who said women have to be like this? Where was that conversation? Where was that convention? Who was in that meeting? And should we revisit that as people change, times change, values change? This book, if you were a housewife, if you were a homemaker, and you did find some downtime after taking care of the house, after taking care of the kids, after taking care of the husband, after taking care of the shopping, and you found some downtime and you decided to spend that on yourself and you decided to read a book, called The Feminine Mystique. And you have that aha moment. And you're like, my God. Or and we can find this in a multitude of mediums where you read a quote, you watch a show, you're observing an actor or an actress, you hear the lyrics to a song, and in that moment you feel like that's me. This is pulling at me. The feminine mystique did exactly that for women who were in homes and they're reading the book and they thought there's got to be something better than this. And there's nothing wrong with that either, though. Man, there's nothing wrong with that. Man, it's hard being a stay-at-home mom. It's hard to be a homemaker. You're trying to pass the time, trying to have adult conversation. There's no social media back then. There's no, it'd be difficult to communicate from time to time, and life was different. But this book did ultimately push forward a conversation. What do women want? Why should women want this? Is it okay to want that or the other? I'm not saying one's right and the other is wrong. What I am saying is that there should be options. And that I believe that's what Betty was ultimately getting at here. Is like, there's nothing wrong with being a homemaker. Nothing wrong with being a housewife. There's value in those roles, those positions, in those relationships. Absolutely. If you want them. If that's your desire. And it should be okay to have other desires. The feminine mystique will kick off the women's liberation movement. It says here, what bothered them the most was the status of women within the movement, where assumptions of male supremacy seemed as deeply rooted as in society at large. The purpose of that statement there is to give credence to how women felt in various civil rights organizations throughout the civil rights movement. That as they were protesting, agitating on behalf of other Americans so that they could be seen as equals in our society, they realized that in various levels of leadership, women were seen and treated as second class. The irony there. And so women ultimately are going to organize, demonstrate, rise up, and begin to challenge the culture as the culture saw them. And that gives birth to a new wave of the women's liberation movement. Again, there are various catalysts that will assist in that. Betty Friedan's book will do just that. It says here that in 1962, 2/3 of American women felt that they were not experiencing any discrimination, but by 1974, 2/3 of them will. That in about 10 years' time, women are awakened to a reality. It's almost as if they left the matrix and were exposed to the truth. Why do we have women beauty pageants? What does it mean to be beautiful? Why do we have cheerleaders at football games? Why do we have these standards? Or why do we have these places where women might feel objectified? And is that something to consider? Is that something to question? And why can't we question? Why can't we consider? I'm not saying one's right or wrong. There's nothing wrong with anything that I just brought up. But we can't have a conversation about it? Women are pushing the envelope that yes, these conversations need to be had. And yes, women need to be involved in those conversations. And then we might have a better understanding on how to move forward together. Nonetheless, women are members of the marginalized society that will be reflected in this generation's counterculture, the generation of the 60s. There will also be another liberation movement, and that will be of the gay liberation movement. Gay men and lesbians, or gay women, had long been stigmatized as sinful or mentally disordered. Um, in society back then, the movement wasn't identified as the LGBT movement, um, or the other letters that could follow afterwards. As we notice that there's a spectrum of struggle, for sure. And that even within that struggle, there are levels of um, discrimination. The the notion of the gay liberation movement, or the point of origin that most historians tend to identify concretely, would probably be the Stonewall riots. Now, of course, if you were to take a gay liberation graduate course or an advanced level history course on the LGBT movement, historically, we can find many points of origin that one could argue is the catalyst here and the catalyst there. But during this period of counterculture, during this period of the 60s, the Stonewall riots serves as a point of reference for sure, where things are catapulted into conversation. The Stonewall riots take place at a bar in New York called the Stonewall. The Stonewall is owned and operated by mobsters, and everybody knew that this was a gay nightclub. Police were aware of it, and the police would oftentimes raid the club if they felt like they weren't being properly compensated. They would harass the patrons. The drinks were 3 times that, 4 times that of an original or a drink cost anywhere else, because people knew that if they went to the Stonewall, that yes, they were being fleeced for their money, but that money then provided them a sense of security, that this would be a place where we can gather uh, and be ourselves again, to be an individual without being humiliated, discriminated, subjugated. And it's in 1969 that while at the Stonewall, um, patrons were tired of being taken advantage of, tired of being assaulted, physically, sexually, verbally, harassed. And these individuals are going to fight back. They're like, hey man, don't get this twisted. Don't think stuff's sweet simply because I got mascara on. Don't think because I got glitter on my face, I won't F you. I mean, oh, excuse me. I won't mess you up. Uh, and these individuals at Stonewall decided to fight back, and for 5 days they were fighting back against the police who were trying to raid the bar, and they weren't going to have it. They were going to let you know that they were tired of the exploitation, they were tired of the degradation, and that their desires to be treated equally as American citizens should be recognized. This moment in American history is pivotal in the sense that America will be exposed to elements of society they were not willing or ready to recognize. And that if you were sincere in your desire to ensure that every American was free from discrimination, then we had to recognize, understand, and support this cause. It offered an opportunity for many to step out of the closet, if you will, to come out of hiding, to insist that sexual orientation is a matter of right, it's a matter of power, it's a matter of identity, and that your ability to identify yourself is probably one of the most high levels of fulfillment, maybe just like the I know who I am. That helps me get up every day. You don't have to see me as such. Don't hate me for seeing myself as such. I shouldn't have to force you to like me. You don't even gotta acknowledge me. You might. I mean, I guess well, you do have to acknowledge them because then how else could you respect somebody? But people should be afforded respect, decency, humanity, and it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a struggle. Not everything is going to happen and take place immediately. And for many people today, the LGBT conversation movement isn't a constant um, battle to discern um, the success or goals of that movement. Oh, I forgot to mention this. I definitely do want you to underline the Stonewall riots. Again, the Stonewall riots represent a pivotal moment in the gay liberation movement, um, catapulting the conversation um, across the United States.